habitats that we're working at. It's also an area that is experiencing issues with sea level rise currently and forecast it to be even worse in the future. So it's a place that really gives us an opportunity to look at some science around coastal issues. We have a high population area right next to us, so we're close to the urban center. So we also have opportunities to look at how we can use our coastal habitats and environments to really mitigate some of the effects of sea level rise and climate change that we're starting to experience.
And this, what is it about the geographic location of this spot that makes it sort of unique to study stuff?
So there's a couple of things here that make it really kind of a unique setting for us. On the ocean side, we have a limestone outcropping, which is what gives the preserve its name, Blowing Rocks, which is actually one of the largest outcroppings on the Florida coast, which makes it unique in itself. But it's also a very important sea turtle nesting beach. We actually have primarily loggerhead turtles, but we also get green sea turtles and leatherback turtles nesting here. So there's opportunities looking at endangered species and look at how they utilize this beach for nesting. And then when we look on this side of the coast of the preserve, on the lagoon side, we actually have an area that gets influenced quite heavily by runoff. And we experienced issues with red tide this past year, as well as blue-green algae when those issues were occurring. When we get lots of nutrient overload into our system and causes those to come up, we experience that here. And it's an area that is also one of our most visited preserves in the state. And that gives us an opportunity to really look at some of the human dimensions of how people are interacting with nature. And also, when we look at our coastal habitats here, how we're looking at coastal resilience and some of the larger strategies we're really trying to look at across the whole conservancy, and especially in Florida, in areas that are very susceptible to sea level rise, we can look at how we can restore native habitats like mangroves that we have on this side, but also look at other solutions that might mix other habitats in, as well as being able to use some man-made structures that we see across the lagoon from us, and be able to look at the difference of how they absorb sea level rise and how things change. We're also looking at trying to expand the science that goes on at these preserves, and look how we can partner with universities and other scientists and be able to use these as a site to look at the impacts and how we can help mitigate it. We're already seeing areas here that are getting inundated with salt water on high tides 3-4 times a year. When we have our really high tides of the year, we see saltwater intrusion coming in. We've seen plants starting to die off. So we can start to look at how communities are going to change and look at how that effect's going to happen and where we're going to see some of the different plant communities change. What effects would that have on wildlife? But also importantly, how does that affect people? And being right next to a population center that we have people coming out here, they can see those changes and help really get that out and start looking at how we might be able to address some of those issues that are coming.
And how can the work, how can that be used as sort of a model for other parts of not just the conservancy, other conservationists and people dealing with these challenges, which seem to only be increasing?
Yeah, the challenges are increasing, and we're one of the interesting spots here that we're noticing when we talk about climate change. A lot of times people talk about the future issues. It's not future here. We're seeing those impacts now. We're seeing populations start to shift and change. We're seeing saltwater inundation occurring, flooding occurring here on just a really high tide. Not related to a storm event or anything. We're seeing saltwater coming in. Florida, in particular, is a limestone environment. The rock underneath us has passageways. It's almost like Swiss cheese. So you can't build a wall like you could in Denmark, for example, and keep the sea at bay, because the water would just come right through and come up on the other side. And that's something that we see happening here. So we have to be more creative. We have to find other ways. How can natural habitats help absorb some of that impact and give us more of a buffer between the ocean, the rising seas that are coming in? We'd also need to look at property protection and how we can actually protect properties and how we can integrate nature into that to give us that helping hand, knowing that we can't just build up a solid structure that would keep it at bay.
And are you finding is there anything you're finding that is surprising or particularly interesting so far?
One of the things I find fascinating coming here and watching the shifts and how things adapt naturally. That's one of the neat aspects of this particular preserve is we've actually restored the whole coastal strand. So we have a natural dune system, we have the coastal habitat here next to it. When you go up and down the coast of Florida, that's kind of a rare spot to find. Most of the places have been developed. We like to have hotels and restaurants and other things with ocean views. So we've really developed a lot, and we are starting to rebuild the dunes and get those up. But seeing how much it shifts and changes over time. We go out, there's times of the year when you go out on the beachfront here and look out, and it's just a sandy beach. You don't even see the rock outcroppings. And then you can come out the next week and it's shifted completely, and now it's a 10-foot drop down to the water from the limestone rocks that are out there. And getting an idea of how that affects and those changes and that changing in how it shifts gives us a little bit better idea of how we need to manage our coastal and realize that we can't just hold the line of exactly what we have. It kind of highlights that adaptation that nature has and what we actually need to work with and help to encourage to occur so we can help things move along in a natural way.
So as a scientist, how do you deal with so many variables? Like if something is changing that much from day to day, how do you I think of science as you have a very controlled environment and you just check one thing at a time. Like, how do you deal with that?
So in the coastal environment and in our marine environment, change is always occurring. And that's something that we've gotten kind of used to working with. And that's one of our challenges that we have to work with is looking at different impacts that are occurring and what's behind them, what's causing them. One of the things with it's because it's so dynamic, there's hardly ever a one-to-one relationship. So even though we say one of our bigger issues is our water quality issues, for example, and we look at what's causing that water quality issues, a lot of it's coming from runoff from nutrients and fertilizers and those type of issues, but that just adds to the situation. And it's all cumulative impacts of the other things that are occurring, which is actually what causes a lot of the problems. So sometimes you may really address what was one of the bigger issues and not see the change that you expect. And there can be a delay in the time for it to come back and recover. So that adds some complexity to it. And a lot of it is really getting to understand that cumulative impacts and how things accumulate and work on it together, that it takes you addressing a lot of issues together. And you really have to understand how the system works. And one of the biggest things that gets overlooked a lot of times is people. And that's one of the things that we can really have an opportunity here to understand is how people interact with the environment and their dependence upon it. Our coastal areas here are really heavily dependent on tourism and on fishing and being able to be out in this environment. And that's one of the things we have to look at is make sure that those services stay there, that people can still go out and fish and recreate on these areas that really holds a lot of value to them. But what does that mean in a changing system? And how can we look at it with the changing that's going on and plan out for those changes so that we don't see major impacts to our livelihood? And really the reason people come to Florida is the beautiful beaches and the beautiful water and weather, and we want to make sure that that stays and we're able to keep those services going even if we're experiencing all this change around us.
That's an interesting point. Just go a little into that a little bit. I think a lot of places where we're studying things don't have those same issues. So
yeah. So that one thing that Blowing Rocks really gives us an opportunity to look at is a coastal system that's right next to 6 million people. The metropolitan area that starts pretty much right here and goes south through Miami has about 6 million people in that coastal area. And this is an opportunity to really look at how we still have a beautiful habitat and beautiful areas with a lot of resources here that are flourishing, but still in that interaction with people. And that gives us a really unique opportunity to look at that and be able to come in and look how our conservation work can actually have a direct benefit to people, but also working with them in conjunction with that. Because it's something that's really important for this area, is being able to come and experience something that has been restored back to this natural way and be able to compare that to some of the other beach parks up and down the coast. And one of the things that has been shown a lot recently with a lot of the increase in hurricanes we've been experiencing in Florida, these natural areas do provide a lot more of coastal protection to us. We've seen examples of storms that come through where they have taken down the beach dunes, where they haven't restored them, where mainly for views so people can look out and see it. And when those storms come through, the waves get really big, and we've seen a lot more coastal damage from those storms compared to the areas that have intact dunes. So that's another example we can show here of how we can actually restore an area to provide some of that protection to people and the resources that are up behind it.
Excellent. And so from a conservation science point of view then,
It's an interesting question. If we didn't establish Blowing Rocks, it's amazing to think that's 50 years ago that is when the preserve got established. And if we look at this area 50 years ago, it was almost all covered with invasive species. And it was a totally different system that was here. And over that time period, we've been able to do a lot of natural restoration. And now we're able to actually look at what this area, what almost all of the barrier islands in Florida used to look like, and how their natural systems were here. We've been able to restore some of the mangrove populations up in here. And now we have the opportunity to look at that restoration in a resilient perspective and see, okay, do these areas that still have the natural habitats and natural systems intact, how do they respond to climate change and impacts compared to areas that have covered with invasive species or have been developed? And this gives us that opportunity to really look at those impacts and see how a natural system can actually work within that and be able to absorb and be more resilient than an area that's not.
and looking to the future, what do you think is going to happen in the next 50 years? What does the future look like for this preserve?
This preserve is, the next 50 years, it's going to be experiencing a lot of changes, just as Florida is going to be experiencing a lot of changes. We're seeing the sea level rise impacting us now. We know that even if we were to be able to change our ways and really address the root causes of climate change, our seas are still going to rise, and we're still going to see impacts that occur. So we're going to see habitats it's going to be different. It's like I said, this area is dynamic in itself naturally, but we're adding to that dynamicism with having more impacts from climate change occurring. We're going to see areas that are going to get more inundated. Hopefully, with having mangroves here on the coast, it'll help absorb some of that. We'll be able to see an area that has changed, but still going to be unique in the area.
And for you personally, what do you love most about this place?
When I come to work, and I feel kind of privileged to have my office here at the preserve, since I'm a statewide scientist, not focused just on the preserve here, it is just such a great feeling to be able to escape the hustle and bustle of the city in 5 minutes. And now I'm in an area that is natural, and I see the water and the coastal environment here. It just reinvigorates me. And I see what we're really trying to make sure stays into the future and the benefits that we have, and being able to see the amount of people that come here and just really enjoy being here at this location. And that really inspires me to make sure that we look at our shared conservation agenda and the goals that we've set for that, and it kind of brings it home. And I can really see this is what we're talking about. This is what we're trying to achieve on a global scale, is be able to have places like this and make sure that they are sustained into the future.
Excellent.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What is the importance of having... Okay, whenever you're ready.
All right, so we're on the barrier island, and on the ocean side, we primarily have a sandy beach and a dune system that really is the main habitat that protects it. On this side of the island, we have a much calmer lagoon that's over here. And one of the things that happens on this side of the island, this is where we get a lot of boat traffic that goes in and out very close. And when boats go by, we get a lot of wave action. And that can cause coastal erosion issues. And when we add to that sea level rise issues that we get, you may say, oh, we're on the inside. Why are we so worried about that? This side gets affected by the tides just as much as the ocean side does. And it also gets affected by the sea level rise. In this area where with the mangroves, they actually absorb a lot of the wave energy that comes through from boats. And it's really interesting, behind me, across the lagoon, there's a marina that has a seawall, which is just a concrete wall that goes through. And when the boats go by, you can see the waves hit it and they splash up and go through. Meanwhile, on this side, the mangroves just absorb all that energy. And we're able to kind of see that right there. There's also an area where you can look at where mangroves were planted in front of a seawall to help absorb that energy that comes through. So that actually our idea is that by doing that, by incorporating nature into that coastal structure, we can actually increase the longevity of the seawall and also its effectiveness.
All right, sorry. Can you back
Yeah.
up just a little bit? Thanks.
Yeah. How far?
What coastal seawall, mangroves?
Yeah.
Incorporating mangroves.
Yeah. So one of the when these boats go by, we can see how the waves come out and hit the coast. And the neat thing about the beach right here on mangroves, on Blowing Rocks, is we have mangroves, a little bit of sand beach, and as the waves come in, you can see the mangroves actually absorb that energy, and we don't see a lot of erosion occurring right behind it. If you look across the lagoon, you can see a marina that has a seawall built, and when those same waves hit that seawall, you can see the energy get splashed up and waves come up. Next to that is an area where they also have a seawall, but they've planted mangroves in front of it, and that actually helps absorb some of that energy. So that's a great illustration of an area that, yes, we would love to see it all natural, but we can actually incorporate nature into a built environment to help make the seawalls more resilient in the long term, because those mangroves in front can help absorb some of that energy before it actually hits the wall. It also is important for homeowners to think about that their property line, as the sea level gets coming up, they may start getting impacts and start getting sea level coming in and water coming in from the boats coming by. Those wave energy is just going to get worse. And by having mangroves fringe their property, they can actually help protect their property as well and protect that environment from what we're seeing with the energy that comes through.
So that thing you're saying about the mangroves in front of the seawall, to me, that's a great example.
Yeah, that one of the things that Blowing Rocks really helps us with, being right next to this major metropolitan area where so many people live on the water. One thing about South Florida, most people think, oh, just the coast, but we have so many lagoons and waterways that there are so many waterfront homes. And with those waterfront homes, when we're getting sea level rise issues and the sea's coming up higher, and you get boat traffic or even storm generated waves, they put out energy that can actually cause erosion issues on there. Having this place here, we can actually look at how nature can help absorb those energies and displace that energy so that we don't get the flooding and erosion occurring. And this gives us that great opportunity, being right here next to that metropolitan area, to test some of those ideas and look at how we could do that, not just from a science perspective. We can get the science down, and we've shown how important natural habitats are, but we can also now start looking at it from an engineering perspective, because that's really going to be the crux to get natural infrastructure in place, is taking it from a natural area where there's no people that are really being protected, but how do we now take that and incorporate it into the built environment, and how we incorporate it to areas where it's actually going to be impacting people and property. And that gets into the engineering side of things. It's working with our partners in government that have to look at these from a permitting perspective. And how does that actually look at how it extends the lifespan of it? One of the interesting aspects of it when we look at coastal resilience, we're talking about it from a natural perspective, we realize that, you know, for us, mangroves provide this habitat, they're really important for that, but they also provide that other benefit that we're talking about. It's more of that engineering benefit. And trying to get past just the science behind it that proves it, but taking it now into an application. How do we take it and apply it in a environment? And what does that do to the surrounding properties? And there's issues with that a lot of times get overlooked, that yes, when you build a seawall, that energy doesn't just get reflected, it gets aimed over next to the next door neighbors as well. And that can actually cause erosion problems for others. And that's something that the engineers have figured out how to look at with a built structure. But when we add in natural structures and we now start absorbing that, that changes that dynamic. And it can really change a lot of issues. And that's what some of the issues we're working with our permitting agencies and engineers to really start now to get a good handle on and overcome.
Can we talk about boat wave energy while that's in the background?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So in this area along the intercoastal, we get a lot of boat traffic that comes through here. When boats come by, they leave a wake, which is basically human-generated waves. Just like what we'd have out on the ocean with storms or waves that come through, boats create those waves behind them. And that wave energy that comes through is going to come and hit our coast here. Now, on our coast, we're showing how natural habitat, mangroves, beaches can help absorb that. But let's say we had our boat sitting here. And as that boat would go by, if our boat was tied up, it would be getting hit by that wave energy as it goes by. And we have to look at ways how we can help reduce those impacts, especially as the sea level gets higher, that wave energy is going to come up higher and be hitting a higher area. So we can look at ways we can bring in natural habitat to help us absorb it and reduce the impacts of that wave energy that comes by.
Okay, cool. Thank you.